All right, we're back with Michael Yon and Doug Casey, of course. And the idea here is three observations from the past week and one prediction. This is our third week doing it, so we'll see how it goes. Doug, what's your first observation for the week?
Well, I'm happy to observe this from my apartment in Buenos Aires. I really loved being in the mysterious Orient for the last month, really did. But I'm glad to be back home, frankly. So, having said that, the only thing that is important, well, is widely recognized as being important. Let me put it that way. And this last week is this damned election, which is coming up in a week. Uh, that's what everybody's talking about. So I've got a few anecdotal observations about the election. And first thing on my list was it's interesting what Elon Musk is doing with offering $1 million a day to somebody that pledges to vote for Trump. And what is it, $100 to people? Anyway, the thing is that at least one attorney general of one of the states, Pennsylvania, or is it Philadelphia? It doesn't matter because there's going to be a bunch of them that are going to sue him for uh, bribery of the public. I mean, you're not supposed to pay people for their votes, is the bottom line on this. So I think that's kind of a big deal. The fact that Musk is throwing all that money out there and taking a severe risk because it could be adjudicated as manipulating the election through cash distributions. So anyway, uh, and as just as an addendum to that thought, I'd like to say that these elections should not be important at all, at all. And the reason I say that is that the government, since it's coercion, and I've said this before, but it's worth saying many times because it doesn't sink in. The government is force, it's pure coercion, and therefore it
Yep.
should be limited to protecting people from coercion. That means the military for coercion from abroad, police coercion within, and a court system to allow you to adjudicate disputes without resorting to coercion. Now, uh, if that's all elections were, just to elect the warm bodies that would do those things, most of the problems of the world would go away. And we wouldn't have any of this going on, and nobody would care to bribe somebody, bribe the voters to elect somebody, because these are just administrative positions. So anyway, this could be a big deal with a case of no good deed going unpunished with Elon Musk trying to help Trump out and to come.
Yeah, he's kind of got a Willy Wonka, the chocolate factory kind of vibe about him right now. He's just throwing out a bunch of money. He's like the wizard solving the problems. He can make your dreams come true. It's,
Yeah, I've always liked Trump.
A
He was
little
a
odd.
good-hearted guy. Excuse me, Elon, right? Good-hearted guy.
all right, Michael.
Interesting. Oh, actually, I was sitting here taking some notes as Doug is talking. Well, first of all, paying for votes. Some funny anecdotes. When I was a kid, my father would throw away a lot of junk mail, and I would like to open mail because I'm like 9. And so I was going through mail one time, and I opened it up, and there was $1 in it. And I ran to my dad and I was like, there's money in the I was like 9, that's big bucks. And plus it was way back then. It was almost an ounce of gold. Well, not that much, but you know what I'm saying. And
It
and he
was an
goes,
ounce of
"Oh,
silver. It was an ounce of silver back then.
was it? Good
Yeah,
Lord."
because up until let me get this right, 1965, silver was price controlled by the U.S. government because we had silver coins,
Oh,
and so that would have been about an ounce of silver back then because we had silver coins. And if you had 4 quarters, $1, they added
mhm.
up to, well, not quite, I think 0.77 of an ounce. Anyway,
Yeah, I ran to my father with that dollar and I was like, wow, I can't believe it. And he goes, I said, why did they put money in the letter? And he said, because somebody's trying to buy a vote. It's a politician. And I was a little kid and I was like, wow, they actually pay you to vote for them. I actually recognized something was wrong with that. I remember that. And he goes, yeah, it's illegal, but anyway, they do it. And so that's one way they get you to open their letters. In any case, I lived in Thailand for a spell, and you'll find that there's no alcohol allowed on Thai election day. And they don't allow alcohol on election day because people would pay people to come to the voting booths with whiskey. So after you vote, they'll give you whiskey, right? Free whiskey. Another thing is they would, before the elections, they would go out and hand out one shoe to all the huts and village, in the village and that sort of thing. And then when you came to vote, they would give you the other shoe. All these sorts of clever bribes, you just can't make up this stuff. Yeah. Anyway, when you talked about paying for the votes, this stuff, it never ends, obviously. Let me say one thing about Elon. I just get this idea that he's going to be running for president next time, and people are going to beg for that Constitution to be thrown out and let him, the Wizard of Oz, totally just blatantly violate the Constitution like, Obama, I thought, did as well. But I just get that feeling. Maybe I'm wrong, but I would ascribe, I don't know, 60% chance that he'll end up running for president or being anointed.
I don't think that's that far out of prediction, Michael. And the reason is that for years, they've talked about a constitutional convention to actually come up with a new constitution. And they might do it yet. Certainly, if Kamala is elected, that movement to rewrite the Constitution wholesale, throw it out and get a new one. And yeah, that would be one of the changes, probably. Anybody can.
And Doug, you've often always said that eventually Americans will demand a general. It'll be somebody to take charge and fix it. But maybe it's not exactly a general this time. Maybe it's someone else in the pub. Maybe it's Elon. Maybe it's someone in that public eye that can lead, that can command effectively armies.
Well, the only
It'd
problem.
be Elon.
Oh, no, go ahead, Michael.
I was going to say it would be Elon, and then the next election, someone straight from Tel Aviv, that sort of thing. Let's be honest. There's something's not right. They're all going to pay their respects at Auschwitz in advance and that sort of thing. It's really over the top. They're really flagrant about what's going on some levels.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. Will it be a general? I think since we're going into a time of warfare, people will like a general more than Elon, who doesn't have a particularly military background. I think that's an important consideration. And also, the problem with Elon running for president, even if it was possible under a new constitution, if you would, is that he's kind of a libertarian-oriented guy. And as Michael Moore has pointed out to us in the past, the average American is now so corrupt that they'll want to go for somebody with socialist instincts, not free market instincts.
Yeah, it's true. Okay, Michael, well, I think we got your prediction already here about Elon being president. Is there an observation that you wanted to share before we go back to Doug?
Yeah, I'll tell you another anecdote and to observe. You mean in regard to politics or in regard
Just
to
from the last week, things that you saw that were noteworthy this week in particular that you want to bring to people's attention?
Misako and I had just flown to from Thailand to Okinawa to meet with somebody on Okinawa, right? So I went to get a haircut in advance with Misako and Misako Ganaha, and the barber was so interesting. He had these fishing lures up on the wall, and I started talking. There must be 10,000 ways to fish, right? I've told you before, I get along with farmers all over the world. I don't care if they're Taliban, I get along with them. And likewise with fishermen. For some reason, I get along with him. So we started talking about fishing, and he had this lure for squid and all these sorts of things. And then it come to find out he had taken soil samples all over Okinawa because he's thinking about buying a farm, right? And he knows there's going to be food problems in advance coming, right? And so he showed us a map of all these places he's been taking soil. This is the Barber, right? And then he started talking about gold and these sorts of things. And so we invited him to dinner. We invited the Barber to dinner. He closed the shop and we went to dinner. And and we talked with him for hours. This is the kind of thing that you see in Japan. I mean, you'll run into like a barber that you'll actually just like, can you close the shop and come to dinner? And we talked about all sorts of things like this that are going on with the food issues, the energy issues. And he weirdly is tracking all this stuff. You just, it's Japan. I mean, and he's been deep diving, you can tell. Isn't that interesting?
That is interesting.
That is interesting. And incidentally, flying from Sri Lanka back to Buenos Aires here, one of the movies that I watched was that I watched two Clint Eastwood war movies, Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from. Anyway, it was about Iwo Jima, and it occurs to me that since Okinawa was even a worse battle than Iwo Jima, maybe he shouldn't be trying to farm there so soon, because there's undoubtedly thousands and thousands of unexploded ordnance all around that island. It might be dangerous to be farming.
Let me tell you, Flags of Our Fathers, you just mentioned that. That's written by my friend, James Bradley. He just sent me a note about you 2 hours ago. And so he apparently pays close. I know he pays close. He said, Doug Casey is the Elvis Presley of commodities investing.
Oh, I like that.
He said, I'm a little choir boy who can hum a tune. I was asking him about some gold issues, actually.
Well, Michael, tell him thank you very much.
I will. Anyway, he said you are with a genius if you are with Doug, and I would be interested in what he would have to say. He is gold related stuff I was asking him about, because he tracks gold quite
That's
closely.
interesting.
Yeah.
But wait a minute, Okinawa. Do you think
Oh,
it's dangerous to be a farmer there, or
for UXO, unexploded ordnance?
yeah.
I haven't heard about anybody getting blown up. Now, when it comes to UXO, I mean, that's something I've come across a lot in the world. Whether it's active combat zones or just, I mean, it's out there by the unbelievable amounts. I was talking with one EOD guy some years ago, and he was from Belgium, and we were talking about low magnetic signature mines and that sort of thing. And he said they're still finding glass mines from World War I in Belgium, mines made of glass, so they have they had metal detectors way back then, by the way. But there is so much UXO out there, unexploded ordnance, that it's going to be everywhere. And by the way, Ernie Pyle, which would be probably America's most famous and serious war correspondent, was killed on Iwo Jima, or not Iwo Jima, at Okinawa, on a little island called Ioshe. And I went there some months ago. And in fact, he was shot. He had done very well over in the European theater. And then he was there for the, invasion of Okinawa, which was an incredibly bloody battle, Hacksaw Ridge and all that. And he was killed there, actually. What's interesting about Ernie Pyle, though? I read his books after I became a war correspondent. I never imagined becoming one, but after I became one, people would talk about Ernie Pyle all the time. And then so I read his work and to see what he had done. And what was very interesting was Ernie Pyle's experiences were extremely similar to mine, except his wars were bigger. His wars were much bigger, but the experiences he was having were like parallel. For instance, when you come to a new battle zone, when the flagpole hasn't been planted yet, you can do anything you want. Like when I first showed up to Iraq, here comes a helicopter landing. I would literally just go get on it and see where they're going to. And they'd let me on. you know, or, you know, I would go off on one mission with some combat troops, literally introduce myself like, hey, you know, I got a camera. Can we take, boom, who are you? Yeah. You a reporter guy? Yeah, kind of. Let's go. Then I remember coming back to a base in Bakuba after having gone on a combat mission, came right back to base. There was another unit lined up to go out. I jumped out for those vehicles and jumped in the other one, never said anything to the commander, went back on into combat, right? I mean, Ernie Powell talked about that sort of stuff, but then when the flagpole catches up, it's time to move on because he said it would be hard to get on a boat, hard to get in a Jeep, but you know, experiences like that were the same. He said every new unit that rotated in, American troops anyway, I think he was specific about that, as I recall. When American troops, a new unit would come in, they always had new equipment, like a new sort of canteen cup, new, you know, uniform, new boots, which was exactly true. You could always see the new troops because they would always have a considerable amount of new gear, which was pretty, you know, interesting when it comes to the military industrial complex. I mean, not only new gear, they could show up with like, you know, new armored vehicles that you'd never seen before, you know? I mean, it was just, you know, and he was going through the same experiences back in World War II. That's pretty interesting, isn't it?
That really is, actually.
One more thing that he said that was very, very interesting. When he would go back to the United States, everybody wanted to see him. Everybody wanted him to go do this, that, and the other. And finally, he wanted to just go home and be alone. Like it was the same with me because I would do really intense combat. You know, I would go with the combat troops and be in actually a lot of combat. So when I went back one time, I was with my grandmother. I just wanted to be with my grandmother, like unplug everything. And that's it. I just wanted to hang out with Granny, you know, and everybody wants you to come see them. And it's really like, no, seriously, I'm not even going across town. I'm not coming to Washington. I'm not going to New York. I'm being with my grandmother. Don't call me again. Right. And finally I would leave the wars and just go off to Nepal and walk up in the mountains. Right. And he talked about the same thing. He didn't even want to go home because people would just bother him too much. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? Same
Well,
thing.
you know, the French have a phrase for that, which you're giving testimony to, Michael, and that's le plus ça change, le plus ça reste la même. The more things change, the more they're the same.
Yep. Same stuff.
All right, Doug, what's your second observation on the election this week?
Well, once again, I will, with a degree of shame, tell people that, yes, I'm a subscriber to the fag, hag, rag, WAPO, the Washington Post. My excuse for that is that down here in South America, I don't pay I don't know what they charge Americans, $125 or something like that. But if you are signing up from a foreign address, at least down here, it's $10 a year. I figured, okay, just to keep an eye on what these idiots are saying, it's worth it. So I subscribe to the Post. And I read it every day. Some of the articles are actually interesting, but they're all ultra left. I'm trying to figure out which is the most left-wing publication, a major publication in the US. And to my knowledge, and I'm sure I'm missing many possibilities, it's either the WAPO or the Atlantic Monthly, which is just criminally leftist too. Anyway, that's a tangent. That's not what I wanted to talk about exactly. But since Jeff Bezos nixed WAPO endorsing a candidate, the numbers seem to have come out from reliable sources that 200,000 subscribers to WAPO have canceled their subscriptions. That's a lot. And I presume most of them are paying $100 a year or whatever they charge in the US. And that's about 8% of their paid online subscriptions. That's what they say anyway. So, you know, these lefties really take this stuff seriously. And the one interesting thing about that is we know that Elon Musk has become, he's an intelligent guy, obviously, has become libertarian oriented more and more as time has gone by. But we don't really know for a fact what Bezos' political and philosophical views are. He's a money guy. He's made a huge amount of money, but he's never talked about philosophy or this type of thing. And I actually think he's a little bit like Musk. He's interested in space exploration. I mean, not grubbling in the dirt for politics. But, as an intelligent guy, he's seen that WAPO's policy is running counter to reality. In fact, that's even the phrase he used. And that's why he's not endorsing. And interestingly, 3 of the Post's editors have just resigned because they're not endorsing Kamala. And I'm wondering if at this point, since Bezos has focused his attention on the publication he owns, I'm wondering whether he might not replace those 3 editors with 3, at least middle of the road, or perhaps right-leaning or libertarian-leaning people. But anyway, the subscribership of the Post absolutely had a shit fit with the fact that it didn't endorse Kamala. I mean, what are they? I mean, it's crazy. Not that it makes any difference. Who pays attention to what a newspaper says, endorsement-wise, anyway? But anyway, these statistics about WAPO and what's happening with Bezos relative to it, I think they're rather interesting.
Somebody's got to be on like LSD to think Kamala Harris should be president. I mean, I'm not seeing how that works out, but not that I like Trump, and a lot of people know my thoughts on Trump, but Kamala Harris, I mean, seriously.
I mean, she's stupid, she's vapid, she's unknowledgeable. She can't put together a sentence, much less a cogent thought. I'm just dumbfounded at the fact that these stupid Democrats are running her.
But they were also the same people who thought that Biden was of sound mind this whole time, right?
Yeah.
So they deluded themselves into that belief.
They're showing a total lack of respect for the American Republic, which is well deserved, I've got to say. I mean, they're right on about that, but still, I'm shocked.
New York Times, you brought them up. They're interesting. That they just came up this week again. Somebody put a video together of my sort of semi-analysis of that gunshot during, the ear thing with Trump. Now let me set the table with what I'm about, preface it with what I'm about to say. Years ago, I used to subscribe to New York Times until they did the Jason Blair thing. Jason Blair was caught doing a lot of fraud, and he was a diversity hire, obviously, and he was a black man, and he was completely unqualified. He got caught. He was doing cocaine and all sorts of things, and he was publishing stories fraudulently. He got caught. Then it came out that at least 2 editors knew about it, but let him slide. And that was when I canceled. I was like, that's enough. I can see where you can have one fraudulent journalist, but if you caught him and you fired him, I would have just kept the subscription and said, well, that was stupid, but I'm not going to, unsubscribe. But they didn't. They let him stay on. And anyway, later during the Iraq War, New York Times wrote a glowing piece about me, actually. So this would be hurtful with what was to happen next. I mean, I think they were trying to hire me. It was kind of obvious. Like I was taking a break from the war, flew back to Florida. They flew a journalist down from New York and interviewed me, and it was a glowing piece, right? And I thought, such a beautiful piece. They must want to hire me. And anyway, later they asked me to write a piece for them, but I never did. But the point is, then when I saw that gunshot happen, we all saw the thing with Trump, and you saw the bullet trace photo, right? And I thought, something's not right. Now, keep in mind, I'm a professional photographer. I mean, my skills are quite good, right? And I was a special forces weapons specialist, and I grew up with guns, and I was in a lot of combat, and I've seen a lot of combat photography. I have never seen somebody catch a bullet trace. And so that immediately caught, and then, so I was like, what was the shutter speed? I found the shutter speed was 1/8000th of a second, right? And I'm like, now keep in mind, I'm familiar with this camera because it's the camera I'm looking at right now. It's a Sony Alpha 1. It's the exact same camera. It's the camera I use. It's the best camera money can buy, is the one I'm talking into, right? And so, and that's the camera that he was using. And I'm like, why did he have it on 1/8000th of a second? And would that still catch? It was just very bizarre, right? And people are saying, are you saying he photoshopped it? I'm saying what I'm saying is it doesn't feel right, right? Based on my knowledge of weapons, based on my knowledge of cameras, and based on my knowledge of doing a tremendous amount of combat photography, where I actually caught a bullet this far away, splashing off a wall right by a lieutenant's head. I've got the photo, bam, of the wall going right by us, and it's 50mm lens. I'm this close, right? I've got all kinds of stuff like that. People getting shot while I'm shooting the photos. I mean, literally getting shot while I'm shooting the photos. Like the CENTCOM commander now got shot right in front of me while I was photographing him, and that sort of thing. So I'm very experienced with this. So I happen to be the wrong guy that had written a glowing article about me. So it's kind of hard to just throw that out. And also, I just had the right skill set. And I'm like, this doesn't seem right. And people are like, well, how could they do that? How could they Photoshop it so fast? Well, let me tell you, I know about that camera. You can shoot a photo with that camera and it will upload immediately to your office. There's a device you can buy from Sony. Go to sony.com and look for the Wi-Fi device. Or you can literally, I can shoot a photo right now and go right, and it would be in New York in 1 minute. And if you had made a bullet trace layer, Photoshop layer in advance, and you did all the math right, you could photo downloads and you could put it on a skilled, Photoshop guy could do that in a minute or two, right? Especially if they were planning to do that in advance. I am not saying that that's what they did. So what I said was what I've said for years: always shoot your photos in RAW, at some RAW format, right? Because it's very hard to manipulate a RAW without leaving artifacts that are easy to see, right? So I mean, you can, if you provide that RAW format photo to people, they'll be able to detect that, hey, this has been messed with. So the first thing and by the way, there's times when people said my photos were fake, and I'm like, here's the RAW photos, right? Have fun, right? And now, I'm giving you the RAW photos. Now, if you say that again, I'll give you a lawsuit for defamation, but here's the RAW photos because these are the ones that will be in the courtroom, right? So in any case, people back off. Always shoot in RAW. For one thing, you get higher quality. And secondly, it's your insurance when people say it's fake, right? So I said, just all he has to do is release the RAW photos, which he wouldn't do, right? And so interestingly, a lot of people started calling the New York Times photographer out. His name's Doug Mills. And somebody got him and interviewed him about those. And I just saw that video a few days ago. And they took my video saying he should release the RAWs. And this is, this is the problem set that I see with that photo. And he wouldn't come off with the RAW photos. Something doesn't smell right. That's like, where are the ballots type thing, I'm not saying he did it, but I'm saying it quacks like a duck.
That's very interesting. That
Yeah.
really is. When you talk about RAW, not being a photographer, what's the distinction you're making with that word?
RAW is a format. You have all these different formats like JPEG, right? Most people will shoot in JPEG. Always shoot in RAW. And I know you'll talk to your photographer friend, and he'll say, no, shoot in JPEG. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Okay, don't listen to him again. Listen to me. Shoot in RAW, right? So always shoot in RAW. RAW is all the data that comes off the sensor. And on my Sony cameras, it's ARW, right? That's the RAW format, right? So, but anyway, the RAW is all of the data, or actually TIFF is all of the data, right? But TIFF is like these massive files, but RAW is much larger files, right? But they have so much more data, so it gives the photographer a lot of room later to play with the light and that sort of thing. If you manipulate the light, like make it darker or lighter, that's not actually cheating or doing anything unethical or illegal. Because sometimes, you shoot if you're in a Lightroom doing it with the film, you would, change the way that you develop it and make it lighter or darker. And you can do the same thing when you're using RAW. You have a lot more flexibility on your ability to actually manipulate the photos to get the colors right. When they come out of the camera in RAW, they don't actually look good, because they're really they're flat, right? But so it takes a little bit extra time. So some people's camera, like this camera here, the one that he was shooting with, you can shoot in RAW and JPEG simultaneously, right? You can shoot and it'll save one to each, right? And it'll save one of each file. but he should have absolutely shot in RAW. It would be hard for me to imagine that he was not shooting in RAW. Very, very difficult, unless he just made, a terrible mistake as a photographer and somehow left it on JPEG, which would be like a soldier accidentally shooting his foot or something, right? I just don't see him doing that.
Anyway, nobody uses silver film anymore in cameras. That's decades out of time, isn't it?
But those photos from the film, those are better. Those are I'm looking at the best digital camera in the world. That's what I'm talking with you on right now. I mean DSLR, right? Or it's not DSLR, but anyway, it's Sony Alpha 1, right? This is unbelievable camera. But the film cameras like that they took to the moon and that sort of stuff, you look at those photos I think are objectively better than what can come through this $8,000 camera, or $6,000. I think it's not as much as it used to be. Yeah.
Interesting.
But I tell you what, I was always getting the top of the line cameras because I needed that low light and fast focus were the two main things for me. So if they would come out with a new model that was do a little bit better low light and a little bit faster focus, and I'd jump right on it.
Hmm.
So in other words, when I saw that bullet going by, I'm like, speed and low light, that's my world in combat. I need to get, speed and low light, but still it was very, very odd that he would be shooting on 1/8,000th of a second. Some people came out and defended him and say, no, it's not odd. Okay, so let's just say it was 1/8,000th of a second. I still find it extremely odd that he caught a bullet trace. Could have.
Anyway, I kind of figure that although they'd like to take him out before the elections, can they be so bold as to try a third time and hope that the third time is the charm?
I don't know. I mean, this is, me, I think there's big kayfabe going on. I think there's a lot of, but I don't know. I mean, we're talking about people that run Hollywood that can do anything, So, I mean, it's easy. I'm not saying it was faked, but I am not discounting it at all. And again, I'm not trying to prove one thing or the other. Let me say one thing. Years ago, I was watching 60 Minutes, and there was this North Korean guy. There's a book called Escape from Camp 14 or something like that, or Camp 21 or something. And this North Korean guy had escaped. Now he's famous and he's running around the world doing these speeches. I think he got an honorary degree from some big university and that sort of thing. There was a best-selling book called Escape from Camp 21 or 14 or whatever. Some people watching this will probably have read it. But I watched that guy. I watched the interview. It was on 60 Minutes. And I'm like, that guy's a fraud. And I could tell he was a fraud immediately. And I immediately published it. And I said, you can find this online. You could just type my name in and North Korean fraud, right? And you'll see that I open up with something like, now I'm taking a chance with a defamation lawsuit here, but I'm saying this to demonstrate my ability to suss out certain frauds. And there were certain things about him that were just not right. One is people like that never know their birthdays, ever, right? They don't know their birthdays. They don't know how to read a map. They don't know. There were certain things that, I was putting a few things together. His body language was way off. Like body language for guys like that it was just off. You know what I mean? I'm not saying it was deceptive with this body language. I'm just saying that people that grew up in those sorts of places, their body language is always more like this. It's not like his body language is like an Italian, right? You know what I mean? So I took a chance and I made I said a few other things. I'm like, I'm going to take a chance and I'm going to lose everything that I have. This is how confident that I am that guy is a fraud, that he's on 60 Minutes. He's a superhero now and all this stuff. And about 2.5 years later, boom, he admitted to it, right? So you could look that up and you'll see that not only was he caught, he admitted to it. And everybody's apologizing. And I'm like, how in the world did the New York Times and all these other guys write all these articles, Washington, long list, right? The guy that wrote his book, forgotten his name, but he was somebody that wrote for Nat Geo, I think Washington Post, I think, all the big ones. And I remember looking at his pedigree, like, this is a guy who should have done his due diligence. He didn't even pick up on the birthday thing. He didn't pick up on the body language. He didn't pick up on, I picked it up and I just watched like 15 or 20 minutes of 60 Minutes. these frauds are not always difficult to pick out. You just have to just go like, no, I know everybody's buying off on the bullet trace thing, but I'm not. And I'm a combat photographer, and smells like bullshit.
All right, Doug, what's your third observation?
Well, polls, who do they, quote unquote, think is going to win? And I read these things. I don't, of course, for a long time, I just don't believe anything. I don't anything that I read, absolutely not. Anything that people say, absolutely not. Even pictures, it's I don't believe anything. But ABC has a poll with some other group, I forget their name. It says it's 51 to 47 for Kamala. Well, I don't believe it, but the reason that I think a lot of these polls are said to be so close is because if Kamala steals the election, you have to have plausible deniability. Yeah, it was really, really close. And yeah, we won. We squeaked it out. When I think the average American in the heartland is going to vote overwhelmingly for Trump. But then again, in 2020, even though I handicapped Biden to win, I published an article as to why, basically theft. But I thought that there was so much enthusiasm for Trump, and so many people were really going on. But Biden won, and that was anyway. All these polls are unreliable. They're highly politicized. I don't believe any of them. I guess the bottom line for the election next week is Trump will get a lot more votes, but I still think Kamala is going to be installed. And I know there are arguments. I mean, I've talked to some friends. They say, no, they're going to let Trump win because they want the economy to collapse. They want a war. They want all these bad things to happen while he's in office. Well, of course you want bad things to happen when the enemy is in office. But I don't think they want to let go of the reins of power. And they're afraid he's going to do too much damage. So I have a money bet with a friend, 100 ounces of silver, saying that Kamala is going to be installed. But maybe this is academic because it doesn't matter who's going to win. There are going to be protests and lawsuits, and who knows who's going to actually become the president in the new year. Although I think, anyway, don't believe the polls. And that ABC poll that says 51-47 for Kamala, it's got to be total bullshit.
I like that you're betting in silver, not dollars.
Well, I like to do things with actual precious metals because if I either lose or win the bet, either my friend is going to have to pay taxes on the winnings or I'll have to pay taxes on the winnings. So what do we need a third party to the bet for? But if it's simple silver coins, there's no record. It's discrete. It's better for both of us and leaves the state out of the equation.
All right, Michael, what's your third observation for the week? What do you got?
You know, who is going to be president? I do not know. But you know who called me almost randomly tonight was, I mentioned this before we started, was G. Edward Griffin, the author of The Creature from Jekyll Island. And we talked for quite a while. And I asked him about that. Who did he think was going to be? And he looks at it the way that I look at it. I think the way we all look at it, it's an act. I mean, a lot of it's an act. I'm not sure if we're all in concordance with that, but I think you can, if you look closely at Kamala and Trump, you can see the strings pulling up their shirts, you know. I mean, there's somebody else's boy and girl, you know, and so I don't know if it's two different teams or if I think it's the same one. You know, that's what it smells like, and that was clearly what Mr. Griffin seemed to think. Actually, I should ask him to come on with us. I think he would, because he greatly respects you. he mentioned, I think he would come on and we should ask him what he
I think
thinks.
that's a super idea. I think if you possibly can, Michael, you ought to make that happen. That's great that you talked to him.
Yeah, and they're going to do a red pill sort of conference, and he was asking me to speak at it, and I have a feeling he's going to call you. But
Oh, that'd
anyway,
be great. Where's the conference going to be? And are you going to have to put in
no,
a physical
it's
physical
going to be on.
appearance?
It's going to be online. It's going to
Oh,
be so. In other words, he mentioned getting you know how you can get a studio when you're downrange, just getting a studio like in BA or someplace like that,
yeah,
wherever we're
sure.
at. Yeah. So that the lighting's right and the microphones are good and that sort of thing.
Oh, that sounds like
So
fun.
that I'm not looking down, I'm actually looking at the camera but I'm looking at you. Yeah.
Oh, listen, there's one other thing that I was going to add in. It's that there have been press reports about ballot boxes being burned and ballots,
Yeah.
bomb threats to ballot boxes, and a postman was caught trying to destroy ballots from a Republican area and stuff like that. So these guys are taking it seriously, this election, unfortunately.
All right, so Doug, we already have Michael's prediction with Elon, unless you've got another one. Elon will eventually run for president, was Michael's. And if you have another one, we'll hear that too. But what do you got, Doug, for predictions?
Uh, there was an article that I read. I think it's kind of an obscure article, but the point is made that in Puerto Rico, they can't vote for president because they're not, I forget what the technicality is, but Puerto Ricans can't vote for president. And of course, they don't have senators or representatives. So there's long been a movement. There's a movement to make Puerto Rico an independent country. There's a movement to make them a state, so forth. Anyway, the Democrats want to see Puerto Rico become a state. Why? They'll get 2 extra senators, which is massive. And I forget how many representatives, a couple anyway. So that on the ballot in Puerto Rico, although they can't vote for president, they're voting for a lot of other things. And one of the things is a referendum. There have been 7 referendums in Puerto Rico's history dealing with whether or not they should become independent or a state or stay the same, whatever. And this article indicates that the Democrats have fudged things in a way that Puerto Ricans who vote on this referendum about statehood cannot vote for the status quo. That's not on the table so you can vote for be a state or a couple other things. So anyway, the bottom line is the guy that noticed this, the nature of the question on the referendum, says that, yeah, it's going to be put up for statehood, which won't happen unless Kamala is and also captures the House and the Senate. You need all that stuff for becoming a new state. And there's other stuff too. But anyway, that's what's going on. And it's kind of interesting.
Puerto Rico as a state, that's on the agenda for the Dems, one way or another.
It is. And well, who knows? After Puerto Rico, certainly Washington, D.C., 2 more senators and a rep. And then I guess next would be Ukraine, and next would be Haiti. Might as well make them a state. And let's go for it. Let's go whole hog. Let's make Israel a state too.
You know who's always wanted to be a state, or listen, since I've known, is Philippines. And they'll say it all the time. Many Filipinos, many. And you know, I love Philippines, and I see Filipinos, Filipinos, you know, people from the Philippines all over the world. They're like Michael Jackson. I mean, I see them and sparrows everywhere. You can be in the deepest part of Afghanistan. I know there's a Filipino around here somewhere. And sure enough, there's one doing something. You're like,
and there's about, I don't know
knew
what
you'd be here.
I'm not looking at a number right now, but I think there's about 100 million Filipino residents. That's a lot of people. That would increase the population of the US by roughly a third.
I told him, one time I was with Secretary Gates over in at the Shangri-La dialogue over in Singapore, right? And he flew me to the Philippines, right, in that C-17. And he when we dropped off, he was the Secretary of Defense, right? So when he dropped me off, he introduced me to the top leadership there, right? And so I was out with all these generals and stuff, Filipinos and the U.S. commander there and all that. And they gave me access to go down to Mindanao and all that. But they often talked about it. They were like, "Yeah, we'd like to become a state too." And I'm like, "Yeah." And in the villager, everybody. I mean, I've been to Philippines much more than that, but I was even top level people off, and I was like, "You really would like to be a state?" Listen, you would put up with our restaurant inspections for about 1 month, and before you know it, you'd be at war with us. I don't want you to become a state because we all like each other now. You'd
Yeah.
be starting to do terrorism against us like the Puerto Ricans did.
Yeah, but we talk about the Philippines, but as you're well aware, the Philippines is one thing, and the southern Philippines, the
Mindanao, yeah.
Mindanao, that's a different story.
That's where I went down there with. I went down there with the special forces guys. They took me out, and it was pretty interesting. Yeah.
Those people down there are really unfriendly to gringos. I think.
Actually, the places I went, they were actually quite friendly, but the places that I went, but as you know, in other places, you'll definitely get chopped up.
Oh yeah. And from when the US conquered the Philippines back in 1903 or whatever it was, I don't know what the number is. There is no exact number, but I understand that we killed about 100,000 Muslim rebels in Mindanao and environs. That's a lot of people.
There's a good book on or related called The Swish of the Chris. Actually, a Delta Force guy told me about it. But anyway, but the bottom line is they still remember the volcano massacre. Our guys wheeled up the cannons down into the mouth of the volcano. They were hiding down there and lit them up and killed everybody in the volcano. They still talk about that like it was yesterday. I mean, they talk about it constantly down in Mindanao. They keep that alive. Interestingly, down in Mindanao, those people fight similar in some ways to the Taliban. They do something called a pinticasa, which is a cockfight. Most Filipinos, I don't think, have heard of that term. But so when you get into a firefight down there, everybody will drop everything they're doing and run to the sound of the shooting, whether they've got a gun or not, right? And it doesn't matter if they got a shovel and they're out there farming or whatever, they all show up. And so eventually you're going to get outnumbered, right? Because every village, if you give them enough time, they're going to keep showing up, and they'll just come as you are, try to find a weapon there, or maybe they'll show up with one. And so the people, the let's say the Filipino Marines, they can, you'll run out of ammo eventually if you don't get resupplied or get extracted, right? It's pretty interesting because that's exactly how the Taliban will do it as well. They'll go out there and, get into a firefight. If the longer it goes, everybody just come as you are. And very interesting stories about that. I heard a story about one special forces team, a Green Beret team in Afghanistan. They got into a big ambush. I wasn't with them. And then, everybody started showing up, and it went, I think, for maybe one of those Green Berets is watching this, but it went for about 24 hours or so, took some casualties. And later, the Green Beret team went back to some of the villages and said, "Hey, why were you guys coming to the fight? We've had good relations with people from some of these villages." And they're like, "Yeah, well, it was a fight. We're friends, but who's going to turn down a fight? We're Pashtun." That's what we do. It's just like a soccer sport. It's a sport to them, they're good at it.
Plus, I think a lot of these primitive societies take their culture and their religion much more seriously than we do, either one.
Yeah, Pashtun, it's Old Testament, and I mean that seriously. I know that they're Muslims, but actually a lot of people think that they're a lost tribe of Israel, and you'll see even Jewish scholars talking about it. And some of the Pashtun believe that too. But they're Pakhtunwali, which is their basic firmware, their cultural firmware that's called the Pashtun way, right? Straight out of the Old Testament. Eye for an eye, all that stuff. They're hardcore.
Mhm. Well, maybe we'll find out because another movie I saw on the long, long flight across the world was Civil War, that movie produced about a year ago, and I thought it was actually quite good as a production and everything else. I don't know if you've seen it or not, Michael.
No, I haven't, but I keep hearing about it. I need to watch it.
I,
Yeah, I
I
watched
think
the Jones Plantation twice after you said. I'm telling you, everybody should watch the Jones Plantation.
totally should, no question.
What was it from the Civil War movie, Doug, that stood out to you?
Well, it was really gritty in that the rebel states, where they Texas and California, I think, were assaulting Washington, D.C. and attacking the White House just the way they would in a South American Revolution, captured the president and just blew him away, executed him on the spot. Now, that's pretty radical for an American movie. Capture the White House in a firefight and shoot the president when you capture him.
And it was unclear.
Apparently, 12 helicopters just landed there. Did you see that? Somebody sent it to me. Apparently, like 12 helicopters today landed at the White House. I don't know. I just don't have time to follow
Why
up.
would that why would that happen?
I don't know. I think it was truthful. I just saw it as we were about to go on. Somebody sent it to me, and I was busy, and I'm like,
Hmm.
actually, Matt Bracken sent it to me. Another guy who follows you. I don't know if you know Matt Bracken, but he's a former Navy SEAL officer. Very smart guy. He's written books on this, like Civil War. Very good writer and amazingly accurate. And I took him down to the Darien Gap actually, and we spent, I don't know, 2 weeks maybe together. And and he did very well. Well, he's a former Navy SEAL officer, so of course he did well on the Darien Gap. But he's the one that sent me that video about something that was just helicopters landing at the White House. I don't know what was up with that.
Hmm.
Yeah, Doug, you'd like Matt Bracken. He's got, I'd say, I've interacted him with a lot over email, and I'd say he's somewhat of a, he's definitely a Renaissance man. Yeah, so you'd get along with him on that side of things.
It's too bad he's
Oh,
not.
big time.
It's too bad all these guys aren't going to be here in Buenos Aires next week when we're having a file meeting. It'll be nice to meet these guys, or a lot of them anyway.
Matt would like to come. He's not going to be able to make it because I asked him. And Matt made his own boat with his own hands and sailed it through the Panama Canal.
Hmm.
Yeah, he's a pretty hardcore dude.
Renaissance. Yeah.
Oh, that's impressive, actually.
Yeah, you'd like his fiction books too. His latest one is Doomsday Reef. I finished it a couple weeks ago. But that's excellent.
I didn't read that one yet, so it was good, huh?
Yeah, it's very good.
I've got the cover of it on my iPad to remind me to read it.
Yeah, it's worth it. All right. Well, I think we'll leave it there for this week, guys. We'll be back next week, and by then we will, I guess, the ceremony of the election will have happened, right? Because we probably won't record on that Tuesday. But so we'll have, maybe we'll know. Maybe it'll all be over. Maybe it'll be clear who's the winner, or maybe we'll be mired in a months-long mess.
Yes.
Let me ask you this. Well, I'm sorry, sir. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Like I was just going to say, that's the way I'm betting. It's going to be a mess that it won't even be determined by Inauguration Day.
That's what I was going to ask. I mean, what are the chances that actually we're going to have a conclusion there? I think
Slim and none, and Slim's out of town.
See, I'm going to take the contrarian bet on this one. I'm going to say that it's going to be resolved.
Well, I hope you're right.
Kind of. It just feels right. It feels like it's everyone expects there to be enormous problems, and I don't know. I think the unexpected thing is that you get that there's so many people that are so pro-Trump and so worried about the future that I don't know if they'd be. I don't think that they could cheat enough their way out of it, and I think that they're just gonna not fight this battle.
A couple of days ago, another Trump advisor reached out to me, which they do, and they're like, "Once we're in office, I want you to come in and help us on the border policy." I'm like, you know how much I hate your boss. I will help, but I am trustworthy because you know where I'm coming from. I'm not going to be sycophantic, and if I go down to the border and he actually is closing it, people will believe me because they know I'm going to tell them the truth. You know what I mean? If it's open, I'm going to say your boy didn't close the border. If it's closed, I'm going to say, well, Trump closed the border.
So how many people you think are piling across the border as we speak daily, Michael? Any guesstimate?
I don't know. Even when I'm physically on the border, I don't know. Even when I'm out there with the Border Patrol, I was just on the phone today with somebody in Panama. We don't know. I mean, I know that there's increase, like in September, there was a huge number of people that came through the Darien, but I don't have the actual numbers. I can get them from Cinefront if I call them up. Cinefront is like their Border Patrol kind of army. Panama doesn't have an army, but they're very professional, actually. I'm out with Cinefront quite a lot, but I don't know how many are coming through Darien right now, but it's Darien Gap I'm talking about. And keep in mind, Darien Gap is just one feeder. They also fly straight to Nicaragua, because Nicaragua lets the Venezuelans and the Cubans and some others come straight to Nicaragua, and then they start from there, and then others will fly, like many of the Chinese will start in Ecuador, others will start in Mexico. They'll like go to Cancun on vacation, actually, and then walk over the border in Arizona or Texas or California.
The U.S. Reported in September 53,881 migrants crossing.
Oh no, it's going to be more than that for sure. That's nonsense.
Yeah, but that was their number for last month that they reported.
Oh, keep in mind the numbers that they have. When you pay attention to them, they'll talk about arrested or versus, and they won't count gotaways.
Yeah,
there's all these gotaways and known gotaways and all this stuff. There's no way it's only 53,000. I mean, I'm not down there, so I should be quiet. But I just know that I've seen numbers in the past where they're saying things, and I'm like, there's no way that's right.
Yeah, and the other thing is just there's so many that are coming. That this is in addition though to the migrants that came through official ports of entry using the CBP app, and there were another 48,000 of those.
Yeah. Okay. This is where all the obfuscation comes in. Like if you turn yourself in, okay, blah, blah, they cook the books like a CEO that's about to leave the company, right? And also they come across the Canadian border. Of course, as you just mentioned, they fly in 24/7. They come across through Bahamas. They come across planes, trains, and automobiles. And but again, hugely sponsored as well, flying in all over the place. One time I checked into a hotel. I found one of the in McAllen, Texas. I knew that some jets were flying them in, and I knew that the crews were coming through general aviation. And so I just went to general aviation and sat down and had some coffee. And I waited for one of the jets with the aliens came in. And the pilots came through general aviation instead of going through the normal small airport there at McAllen. I started talking with them. Pilot showed me photos of Haitians who had ripped the seat. I didn't know you could rip seats out of an airplane floor. When they realized some were being repatriated to Haiti at one point, they even tried to break a window and crack part of it. I don't know how they did that. They were on the ground apparently, and he wouldn't let me have the photos. But in any case, I saw what hotel they were staying in. So I checked in, and I must have stayed there for about 10 days. And I would just eat breakfast every day when these crews were coming and going to pick up what in the world's going on. Where are they coming and going? I mean, they're coming in from Guatemala. They're coming in from Colombia. They're, most of the aliens are staying. Only a few are being repatriated. So, I mean, that's why I like to do a lot of it myself, because like going all the way across the border, it's very difficult for Border Patrol to BS me, right? It's very difficult for the generals to BS me in Iraq and Afghanistan and that sort of thing. And that's why I like to go talk with the pilots and whatnot.
All right. Okay, we'll wrap it up for today here, guys. Thank you very much for doing it, and we'll be back next week.
Yeah, I'll look forward to it. I actually enjoy these conversations, apart from the fact that we're broadcasting them. I love listening to your rap, Michael. It's super.
Thank y'all. And thank you for inviting me on. It's a huge honor. And it's given me huge creds too. People are like, Doug Casey? I'm like, I know Matt Smith too. And they're like, yeah, Matt's pretty smart too, but he's younger. And he,
Well, it works both ways, Michael. So that's what we call a happy relationship.
Yeah. We have a good team for a podcast. It's doing great.